Now, you've probably heard we've got two rock stars in Sydney this week. The first is somebody called Taylor somebody, and the second is our own rock star, Kathy.
Oh, right.
Kathy needs little introduction because she and her work are legendary throughout the world mining industry. She's the guru, absolute guru on the geology of Olympic Dam, and she's a global pioneer of geometallurgy. As geologists, when we think about the legendary Roy Woodall, we think about his two fantastic discoveries. The one you know about is the Olympic Dam, and the other one is Kathy. Because it was Roy who recognised Kathy's potential and recruited her into his team about 30 years ago. And currently, Kathy is the geometallurgy superintendent at Olympic Dam. Now, we've got a bit of a timing tightness tonight because we've got to be out of here by 7:30, 25 to 8, because orders close in the restaurant at 8 o'clock. Kathy's agreed to present two talks tonight, so we're going to stick to a tight timetable. The first talk will run for about 40 minutes. After that, there'll be a 10-minute break, and the bar will be open for paying drinks. And then we'll convene again for about a 30-minute talk on geometallurgy. After that, there'll be a 10-minute Q&A session. So save your questions, please, for the final Q&A session at about 7:20 or so. And then we'll go to the restaurant after that. So, Kathy, we're thrilled to have you tonight, and welcome to Smedge. Thank you. And Kathy's brought 10 of her pet rocks with her, all of which have the whole number and the depth in the intersection on the back of them. So have a look at these after the talk or at halftime. Thank you, Kathy.
I think so.
I might hook you up with this, which I think just lift you up.
These are got me wired. First of all, Russell's going to give me a little ding at halfway through this talk so that I modulate how much I waffle on about. I'm not sure in the background. Do you need me to have this microphone? Okay, I shall do that then. Then I won't push it too far. First of all, thank you to Russell for being persistent on trying to get me here. Now, first we'll start that even though I'm standing up here presenting on my own, there's always a whole crowd of people behind me that do a lot of work in the background, and I'm just fortunate enough to be the mouthpiece for a lot of them. A lot of this stuff I'm going to talk to you about, particularly about the deeps, I'm not going to concentrate a lot on the geology of Olympic Dam because you can look at, there's plenty of YouTube videos about it. But more of some of our recent work and how you think after 50 years since discovery of the deposit that we're still finding material at Olympic Dam. Max Shawcross is the geoscience manager, and Dave Haddo are the ones that were responsible in doing all the hard work to actually get this, to get that deeps mineralization going, which was a big drilling effort. Thank you to the SEG, as Russell has pointed out. And this acknowledgement of a country is meant for Olympic Dam, but it's recognize the importance of their well-being and their recognition on the land and all that. So I won't have to read through all this, that I would hope as all geoscientists, we recognize the importance of it and know that's an important part of the work that we do. Standard disclaimer, I'll let you read it on your own time, but it basically says, I would not invest in BHP if based on what I say here. So we're going to go through and do some kind of whizzing through stuff a bit. And many of you have as much gray hair as I do, and you probably know just as much about the geology of the deposit as I actually do. The important thing, South Australia. For those of you who live in this part of the country, nice little place. The Gawler Craton, Adelaide for scale, Olympic Dam, the edge of the Craton. And the edge of the Craton is really where this IOCG belt is, and it extends a little bit to the north. Iron ore out over here, but this has been known for a long time. And we say, you know, with Olympic Dam, we're not alone. There's other deposits out there. There's two other ones that we now own are in production. And there's always more to be found, but the depth of cover is the biggest killer out there. What's so important about this, about that location, the edge of the Craton, edges of Craton, edges of Craton, edges of Craton are all important. The Gawler Range, the Gawler Silicic large igneous province was probably one of the largest melting events in Earth's history after it cooled down the first time. It's special because it contains not only the big felsic lavas that we're used to hearing about, but it's also has ultramafic and mafic rocks, which are really, really important as far as heat, energy. The Olympic province, which is this little bit in here, it is on the edge of the Paleosuture zone, and there's a proximity to the older Wallaroo metasediments and metavolcanics. So when we think about intrusions coming through, having a crust that's already pre-enriched, having mantle that's kind of pre-enriched below you, having a crust that's already pre-enriched in some metals also helps, and that's always contentious. Gold deposits in South Australia are really, the bigger ones are all located along that edge. And another thing the feature that's really important is the Adelaide Rift Complex. I forgot its newest stage. It's the Adelaide Super Basin, I think, is the latest name for it. It's really important because of the post-mineral deformation history. And when I first started Olympic Dam, and for a long time after that, it was everything stopped at 1590, and that was the end of the story. Wrong. We know it was formed during the breakup of Rodinia, and it was active through the Dalamerian orogeny. And then also out there is the evidence for the Stewart and Maranoan glaciation events out there. And we think about Olympic Dam that we've had 1.5 billion years, but really 1 billion years of history out there that's been really wiped out. And there's been a lot of deformation history that we've just lost. We'll touch on them a little bit longer. Geological map of the Olympic Dam breccia complex at about 350 meters, about 450 meters below the surface. There's no surface expressions of the deposit. It's concealed under 350 meters of overburden of unaltered, what I used to call unaltered, unmineralized, uninteresting rock, but there are interesting things in it. The Olympic Dam breccia complex, this outline here, has a footprint of about 50 square kilometers. The important thing is this orange dotted line here, and that's our roughly outline of our resource decoration outline. 6 kilometers in that direction, 3 kilometers north-south, and in general, about 800 meters depth from all the way down here to about here. And down in this area, we have mineralization that's down greater than 2 kilometers. Olympic Dam, like all ore deposits, there's a systematic and really predictable deposit-wide zonations of the elements and the minerals. That's actually how we find these things. That's how we know about them. But as geologists, knowing about these things qualitatively, like mineral abundances, doesn't really matter that much. It really matters to metallurgy, and we'll talk about the geomet off the next slide. And even though the deposit is that we have copper, uranium, gold, and silver as our revenue elements, revenue metals now, the deposit is enriched in a wide variety of critical minerals, even though that they're currently sub-economic. The periodic table in green just shows our 4 revenue ones. The other ones that we have elevated concentrations are in that salmony color, and then the polka dot ones. And then we have, because we have uranium in the deposit, we actually need to worry about the radionuclides that are generated during that process. What we need to know about the geological map. Fresh Roxby Downs granite, 1590 million-year-old granite. We'll talk a little bit more about that. At about 3% total iron. And this line represents where you start to see a little bit of brecciation, but really the boundary where we start getting above about 5% iron, and we just progressively increase as we're going in towards the center of the deposit. The brightly colored blobs are what we call the bedded clastic facies in our barren quartz hematite breccia. The abundances of those do decrease as we go down deeper, but they did form above the deposit. Sorry, the bedded clastic facies formed above the deposit at the same time, and the barren quartz hematite breccia is kind of the end member of all the alteration there. We'll just look at the progression. The big thing that we always focus on is the alteration of the Roxby Downs granite, because that's the most dominant feature. And what we're going to do is step through, go from the granite, Roxby Downs granite, really where there's still survivors of fresh granite out there, to granite that's highly altered, and we just brecciation and iron alteration is increasing as we go this way. Here's just a few little slabs, and these little slabs of rock are probably about 30 mil across. So the old BQ diameter, a little bit bigger than that. Fresh Roxby Downs granite, this altered granite, significantly altered granite. Granite breccias, that's actually got a lot of hematite in it. and this progresses down where you got hematite-rich breccias, and then eventually to HemQ, which can have up to 60% iron. And the real definition of this, besides being variable concentrations of hematite, quartz, barite, it's the lack of aluminosilicates in there that's really the defining part of it. So we go from Roxby Downs granite again down here, and it looks like simple, nice breaks in between there, but they're not in reality. It's just a continuum of changes. Beauty. We'll start with the lower plot here. And what we do is we just take a lot of data and mainly on the edges of the deposit and going in. And this is potassium and sodium. And we start with the unaltered Roxby Downs granite, relatively unaltered Roxby Downs granite. And we just gradually, as the sodium or the plagioclase is being destroyed, we just gradually deplete it. And really, you've converted, by the time you're down at the bottom, down at that roughly 6%. Potassium, you've converted all the plagioclase to cerussite, and you're already starting to alter the K-feldspar quite a bit. We turn trajectory and go down this way where you wipe out the K-feldspar, then you wipe out the cerussite, and nothing's left over but barren quartz hematite breccia. Let me just put another little arrow on that. Sorry, I should have had that on. We can look at this data in another way, the iron versus sodium potassium ratio. There's all kinds of different ways of looking at the geochem. The most important thing is most time when we plot it out, there's systematics to it. And that systematics actually helps my world, the geomet side, tremendously, because I can use whole rock assays eventually, ultimately, to predict what the metallurgical properties are going to be. And my predecessors spent a lot of time worrying about what the breccia textures were actually telling them. For me, that's just too much information, too difficult. You end up with 80 different rock types. Trying to get people to log 80 different rock types, good luck. We've changed that around a lot, but did that based on a lot of people's hard work a long time ago. Not only are the gangue minerals predictable within the deposit, but even more so the sulfide minerals. So the sulfides, pyrite, and we go through this transition from the edges of the deposit and deep to the proximal shallow parts of the deposit, pyrite, chalcopyrite, bornite, blah, 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 up there to chalcocite. Few photomicrographs showing chalcocite, the beautiful chalcocite, bornite, myrmekitic intergrowths, bornite with a little bit of chalcopyrite in it, bornite, chalcopyrite, and pyrite, chalcopyrite, and you even have pyrite. We have a lot of publications off of that. The most important thing for us and why these things are so predictable at Olympic Dam is it's a simple hypogene zonation across the whole deposit. And what's preserved now has not been disturbed by weathering. And so we don't have that supergene overprint that just complicates things significantly. Our complication is breccia textures, but mineralogy is not one of them. There's all kinds of ways we can look at this, but from a simple copper assay and a copper sulfur ratio and a copper assay, I can almost predict the whole performance of the whole plant. And we can do that back at the drill core level because of this pattern that geologists recognized early days at Olympic Dam. What my work was to change that into a quantitative way to express what's going on in the rock. And we'll zip along copper sulfur ratio versus copper. Boom, it all falls along the line, no matter how I'm going to mix those things up. And these other diagrams get changed a lot. The big learning I had when I was a geologist that first started there, metallurgists were yapping on about copper sulfur ratio all the time. I said, yeah, you don't know anything. Refer back to a ternary diagram. Well, ternary diagrams tell you a lot, and they're fantastic, but you know what? This does too. It's a different way of looking at it. And from this, I could actually ultimately end up predicting the absolute weight percent of all the sulfides in any stick and core that we've assayed. And it's highly quantitative. Now, mineralization, I glanced by that very, very quickly. But mineralization, do we actually know the spatial limits of it? Rarely in any deposit do you really know truly the spatial limits of it. And Olympic Dam's no exception to that. There's more than 3 million meters of diamond drilling since discovery in 1975, and of which we have about 2.5 million sets of assays for a pretty good suite of elements. This image on the right-hand side just shows the resource outline. But then at all these little gray traces everywhere, it's just all the drilling project up the flat surface. And you look at that, you think that's a lot. Well, our drilling actually only represent 1/10,000th of the volume of that deposit. So even though we have a lot of drilling there, there's still a lot to be known. So what we're going to do is say, have we discovered everything? Of course not. That's why geologists are still around. Has all the potentially economic mineralization within and outside of that immediate resource outline been delineated yet? No, it hasn't. So what we're going to do is kind of swap into mode. We're going to talk a little bit about what that mineralization looks like at depth. And we go back and reflect on the discovery of the deposit. It was really, besides having an exploration model for it, but it was really based around coincident gravity and magnetic models. Coincident gravity and magnetic anomalies. Now, that information that was available back in 75, 74, and 75 was old BRM, regional gravity and magnetic data. These days we have a lot better, but it actually doesn't tell us a whole lot more. It just produces a prettier picture. This is a gravity image, and this covers most of our mining lease. Note the scale bar down on the lower right-hand side. And in here, the Fourier derived vertical gravity gradient. To me, that just means a derivative, you know, of the breccia complex. But how cool is it that besides this outline, which was recognized very, very early on, happens to match that resource outline pretty well, which this resource outline was defined independently of that. So something must be working right. But in a modern sense, we try to say the edges of this breccia complex, you know, it's really based on wide space drilling, you know, and all kinds of things that I made up just to come out with the line, and my predecessors did too, but it's not bad. We can look at these gravity images, and you can probably get a pretty good idea where the iron concentration really starts significantly changing. And it's not bad, you know, the guys before me did a pretty good job. This outline looked a little bit different, but it was still not too bad. So we go through and say, based on this, what does gravity actually tell us? Gravity tells us there's a steep gradient here. Most of our drilling is really confined within that area. RD1, RD10 for perspective off of it. RD2773 was a long hole that I put in, was the deepest hole in the deposit until very recently that I actually drilled that one. And RD1988, we're going to refer back to, that was the first hole that was in the deeps. But we can see out there that there's other little things around, a little gravity anomalies out there, but still where the big beast is, it's centered right around in here. Now we'll go on. So from a historical perspective off of deep mineralization, we'll put a little cheeky comment up here. Hindsight is tricky, memories fade, poor documentation, but people involved with the discovery are still alive. And even people involved with the more modern dealing with the deeps is also still alive. So it's always good to get the stories out because they're actually really important. In 2003 to 2005 we always were faced with the question, what does the geophysics really reveal below the deposit? So our exploration arm of the WMC at the time was interested, you know, projected down to the moho, you know. But me as a mine-based geologist, nah, I'm not interested in that. You know, is what can I do to actually tell me where more ore might be? But this image over here was gravity and magnetic inversions back from, you know, 2003, 4, and 5. And, you know, our level of drilling was really up at that level, you know, no deeper than about 1,000 meters. And they projected all this stuff. And yeah, right. You know, if I can't measure it, it doesn't exist, you know? And so, but it's still very cool. And at the time, and I remember all the time when I was at Olympic Dam, when Rory was still alive, he would always ask me, he said, I want you to put down a deep hole into the moho, you know? And I'd say, okay, you give me as company director, you give me several $1 million to drill a deep hole. Where are you going to put it? So we've had options in the past to put down deep hole, but where were we going to put it? In the center of the deposit? Because we know that barren quartz hematite breccia has a bottom to it and it goes into granite. So where does it go? Well, lo and behold, some good geophysicists come along and say, well, we can do a density. So you take the regional gravity information, local gravity information, and then you subtract out our density from on every single assayed sample. We have 2.5 million of them. We also have a bulk dry density on those samples. So we could create a gravity model based on that, and then subtract the two, and then say, where's their missing mass? And that was exactly that was done in 2004, 2005 to say, where's there something around there? Now, even though the missing mass actually, this is kind of an odd view. So looking from the southeastern corner of the deposit going up, this is the oblique. So there's kind of like the southern end of it, way up north. There's little blobs out here that we actually haven't measured. But we had a target after looking at the best spot, and it was still pretty rough. And so the best hit was done because it was in the heart when we were doing all the drill out for the potential open pit Olympic Dam. And RD 1988 was drilled. It was drilled in 2006 to about 1,900 meters. It ended in 1.6% copper, 1 gram per ton of gold, and some uranium and silver. But really important for us, it also had a very distinct geochemical signature there. It was moly, arsenic, antimony, tin and tungsten enriched. Not economic. Moly might be a little scapy, but still not economic. It was cool. But we were focused on an open pit. Don't worry about anything greater than about 1,000 meters under the deposit. But we were smart enough, we're going to put something around it. So we drilled 2 long navigational holes, one from the north and one from the south, to check what that width might be, because we know that we put an almost vertical hole into a subvertical oriented ore body, and you need to know something about width. They both intersected deeps and below 1,500 meters. And the first hole intersected about 130 meters wide, grades very similar to the first one. And the second angled hole, or the second navi drilled hole, again, a little bit wider, but the same similar grades. Drilling at those depths at that time was for the day, that was pretty deep for the standard of the day, because nobody was mining below 1,000 meters, frankly, in a base metal mine. But the beauty of it, it's never forgotten. It was put on very low priority because we had a massive resource that set several hundred meters above, that was shallower and easier to get to with the infrastructure already in. Time rolls on. Now, time rolls on until a couple years ago, some opportunity as far as some growth work went to go through and say, well, money became available. Do you have some place to drill where you might delineate some more ore? Certainly do. So back to the deposit, and we'll just look at a little pseudo cross section here from RD 1988 and the trace. And sorry for you people online, I'm not sure you can see my little cursor, but really in the center, you can see the trace for RD 1988. 2786A was one. The other angled holes, the other one's 300 meters to the north off of that section a little bit. And what we hypothesized at the time was some pretty steep faults, but the steep faults that are on the southern margin of the deposit was really based on geochem. And on the other side of it, we believed, because we could see some of the structures up in the ore body itself, that was projected down. So it wasn't until recently, we started in November 2021 to start drilling this area and to actually test that, and then step out from that area to see how long that mineralization zone is. We had a good idea about depth, we had a good idea about width, but not total strike length. So we'll flip back to this image again. The light gray in the background is all the other drilling. The ones in the dark outlines are what we call the deep drilling. Again, long angled navigational holes, because we want to hit a subvertical ore body more than 1,500 meters underneath the surface. So you have to step back quite a bit. The area that's been drilled, that's been talked about, is really in this box here, but really far down, hundreds of meters below existing development and all that. And in the operational review, so as geoscientists, we're quite excited by this finally being published. Extensive mineralization continuity, attractive copper grades above 1%, and more than 2 kilometers of strike length, more than 1 kilometer in depth below the existing mine. So stay tuned. There'll be more, I'm sure, about this in the future. So between November 21 and September 23, which is the timing for the information that was presented, there was about 62 kilometers of Navi drilling that was done with a lot of drill rigs. And that's why the geologists that were involved in doing all that, I just got to swan in every once in a while, look at core. I spent a lot of time swanning in, looking at core, looking in granites and all of that, while they're doing the hard work, just trying to pull those things off. Other picture that is in the public release shows these cross-section lines, and for keeping short on time, I'm only going to talk about one of them, but there's a similar thing all the way across, and you can look in the public release and see that. One of the important things as geoscientists, we're used to isometric viewing, or isometric views, so are mining engineers. Metallurgists, not so much, and we have a metallurgical colleague here. Metallurgists usually they're not spatial, they're linear, because the ore comes to them in linear matter, and that's called the conveyor, but it's okay, we love them. Metallurgists are a geologist's best friend, actually, on the site. The existing workings at Olympic Dam, and this was tried to portray that the area that were drilled with all the nice little colors, and the hot colors are the better ones off of there, that it really is significantly below current infrastructure at Olympic Dam. Thank you, Russell. I think I'm actually probably on pretty good track. Now, geology for a minute, a geological cross-section, a pseudo-geological cross-section with not a lot of information overloaded for other than geologists. But what we'll show, this kind of real gray outline shows where all the underground drilling, or really all the drilling in the deposit was up until this time. The reds represent the previous 1% copper kind of outline. The edges of the breccia complex did this, but that was based on, follow those yellow lines, that was based on those 3 holes that we did almost 20 years ago. And then looking at these drill hole traces, this is only one set of drill hole traces, and look for the nice pinks, yellows, oranges in here, and reds. And you can see that consistent after another. So the important thing is looking at, again, the depth, 1,200, 1,500, whoa, 2,000 meters below the surface, still open down here. And one of the real significant, and you can read about all the intersections off of that, and everything's in the public release. But for the operation, what was really important is we go from existing mine area, and you drop down 400 or 500 meters, there wasn't nothing in between. And so it was good that the drilling team, the geologists doing all the designing and drilling of all that, actually, we found significant mineralization right underneath existing mineralization, and it continues down. So that gives a mind that we don't actually have to go after this stuff and not be producing anything along the way. There's mineralization on the way down to it too. So it's pretty cool. It's so cool. Now, we're going to do and go back and actually start putting a little bit more geological speak into this. Our modeled cross-section, which is not exact same place as this, but it's still close enough because it was a model. To go through to look at that previous cross-section, but chopped off a little bit, and everything's lined up so we get the depths about right. This orange dotted line, this orange dash line is what I used to call the Woodall Fault, and that was based on not seeing anything at that particular location because we didn't have any drill information there. But by looking at the transition of the granites and the alteration pattern that they went through, and then noticing there was a dramatic change, or that across that location, there was something wrong. I needed about 2 more kilometers of lateral space to account for that. And so the only thing in my mind that it had to be a fault. And the geochem on the other side suggested all kinds of things, but it was just a hypothesis. And you say, well, if a fault, was it a nice lateral fault? The gravity magnetics didn't show any evidence of a nice lateral fault, and you'd expect to see that. So the only other thing it had to be was a vertical fault or a subvertical one with a couple kilometers of offset. And a lot of people just couldn't come to grips with that, but that was okay. The drilling, what else is it shown on there? See all these little dash lines? There are all kinds of evidences, all kinds of little faults. Oh, lo and behold, not too many out over there. Ooh, that was cool. My reputation was undamaged, but it's damaged by other things. On the other side, once we go through this other area in here, the ore zone in there, the mineralized zone, I won't say ore yet. The mineralized zone, there's also faults out there, which you kind of expect, and we know that they exist in the shallower parts of the deposit. on the thing, which we call the Woodall. This is Woodall and this is Woodall Junior, but Woodall fault zone. There's altered Roxby Downs granite with very patchy mineralization in it. Then we start going through and say, well, what do we see in the model? The zone where there's copper sulfide mineralization. Whoa, what does the drilling showed? Oh, it's nice when you're in a mine environment, we can have closely spaced drilling. Same what we predicted. We go through and say, Woodall fault zone that was hypothesized is actually reality. We don't know what the true offset is off of it yet. And then that there's fault zones bounding this deeper zone of mineralization. So it was something that was a lot closer to the surface that was dropped down into this deposit and then covered up, a long time ago, over 1 billion years ago. But we think about that offset and amount of erosion that's actually occurred and trying to understand the post-mineral deformation history in areas where we actually have no other ground truth around the region of Olympic Dam except for widely scattered drill holes, truly widely scattered drill holes. So it puts us behind the gun a little bit. Roxby Downs granite, it's host to the breccia complex and the deposit, but like all of us economic geologists know, what role do the granites play? Is it the source of metal? Is it more than just the granite? Who really knows? Absolutely classic granite. And you can go through and read all the details, and we've published a lot off of it, but it's clearly, that's a relatively undeformed one. And then we start gauging the alteration besides the changes in the whole rock chemistry very quickly. Sodium-potassium ratio tells you immediately what's going on. But we destroy the mafic minerals very, very quickly. Then we work on the plagioclase and then eventually on the K feldspar inside the deposit, and you wipe out sericite. But you're taking a rock that's got 75%, roughly 75% feldspars, and the rest quartz and some mafic minerals in there, and getting rid of all those feldspars, really. Fresh criteria that we use is sodium-potassium ratio, like of 1.6, the magnetic susceptibility, and SI units 25 to 50 times 10 to the minus 3, so it's magnetic. The magnetic signature drops off. There is magmatic biotite, but we have no hydrothermal biotite in that deposit. And we have about 300 drill holes in unbrecciated granite, none of which are entirely fresh, even 4 kilometers out from the edge of the breccia complex, which is our widest extent of drilling. There's still signs of alteration. So when I put a boundary around the edge of that breccia complex, that just means there is no more relatively fresh granite still surviving in pockets as we go in. So you got granite unaltered becoming less and less and less, but still glimpses of them. And then boom, the plagioclase is gone and really the magnetic signature is wiped out. And then we're on the edges of the breccia complex. So it works out pretty well. And even though I like to use fresh, I was pointed out by Mr. Contact, it's fresh, but not pristine, and for the granite petrologists, that's absolutely true, because we know these things stew in their own post-magmatic juices. So just as a little thing without labels on them, because I did this at the last minute, trying to figure out what was in here. But what it does is to show the transition in the texture. So when you line all these things up, things look pretty obvious. You can actually start seeing a lot of changes. Absolutely fresh Roxby Downs granite 4 kilometers out from the edges of the breccia complex, and just gradually shuffling around. Color starts changing. Our eyes are good estimates of what's happening at the color. Changes to the feldspars. Then you start getting this kind of weak little cracking start going on. And we're getting close to the edge of the breccia complex. And as we get closer, what we start seeing is the intensity of these fractures start to increase, and the amount of brecciation, the intensity of them, the numbers of the frequency and the size of them just get bigger and bigger. And they eventually convert over to rock that looks like this. When we're in this zone, kind of in the Woodall and what we call the Woodall fault zone, we start seeing a real shuffling of the texture of the granite and just a lot more changes going on. We'll jump down a little bit. In the ore zones, you start seeing real true granite breccias without a lot of hematite in it, granite breccias with a lot of hematite in them, less and less, still more hematite breccias with hematite clast inside of this breccia. Little evidence of granite left over. There could be mineralization across any of these. These ones are mineralized, more and more hematite with a little bit of granite still left over. And then example of our barren quartz hematite breccia with no sulfides in it, but mainly important, no potassium aluminosilicates. So simple to look at. Chemistry changes are nice off of here. One thing that was interesting is this texture of the granite. You kind of superficially look at it and say, yeah, it looks like a granite. Well, look at it carefully. I was told about it by my predecessor, Ken Cross, when I first started Olympic Dam. He said, there's some weird granites out here. They got these quartz beading textures. And I was, yeah, right. And you kind of look at it and you say, yeah, and I could see what he was talking about. And you see it every once in a while in the granites, but was never a real focus. And in these area, and the more we look at the granites, having the opportunity to step out a little bit, we see that most of the granite that surrounds the deposit looks like this before it really gets jumbled up. This is just a really nice example. All these big quartz beading that's going on in K feldspars, and the green that's left over in there is a little bit of plage that survived off of it, but probably wasn't there in that much, and a little bit of the mafic minerals. Best way to describe it, coarse graphitic texture. So if people have ideas about this, I'm keen to know. Quartz and parts of the Roxby Downs granite, they display the subparallel, slightly curved bands that are discontinuously planar. The Roxby Downs granite, it's an upper fractionated part of the bigger Burgoyne batholith. It's approaching pegmatitic in composition. And Ken reminded me about this a couple of years ago, but it's what we had talked about before. And he said, approaching pegmatitic composition cooled too rapidly for the halogens. It's a fluorine-rich granite, to flux pegmatite-sized crystal growth in there. The top of the granite, of the Roxby Downs granite, it was in place at relatively shallow depth. In fact, on the Gawler Ranges, Hildebah age granites intrude their own volcanic piles, and that's not done at 10 kilometers depth. And the uppermost zone is highly altered and smashed up by the early faulting, and near surface phreatic and phreatomagmatic activity that Ken absolutely loved. I'm not completely aligned with it, but he's a smart geologist. Now, how widespread is this texture? My comment is it's very common within the breccia complex, but it's not as obvious as that beautiful thing that we're able to pick up because drilling out on these edges of this deposit. And where it becomes obvious, and anytime you see a one-off or a couple off an Olympic Dam, you say, yeah, that's right, it's an anomaly. But, I need to see more than that to get excited. Where am I at on time, Russell? Okay, we're very near to finished. So just to ooh and awe your eyes a bit. So in this zone of the Woodall Fault Zone, a whole variety of different images, apatite, and sometimes you have to worry, is it apatite or microgranite? It's apatite. You get these nice little apatite zones in there that have absolute classic granophyric texture. You just get these intensely altered apatites. You really can't tell what they are. You get pegmatitic orbs and blobs and all of that, but areas where they're incredibly juicy that's going on. And then we look at even more. Quartz, hydrothermal quartz in the deposit's pretty rare. We go through and look at here's some little porphyritic phase within the deposit, pretty small. Again, more of this brecciated pegmatite with tourmaline and quartz and sulfides, pegmatite, and then just started getting a lot more quartz. And quartz, they were quartz tourmaline dominated. That tourmaline's been replaced. So, and these are all just kind of newer things that we've seen. So it gives us confidence that, more on this, that we were clearly in the top of an intrusion. A picture that's been published a couple of years ago by some of our academic colleagues that have been working with me for quite a while, a nice little cutaway off of it. And it gets back to the saying, is the host, is the Roxby Downs granite merely the host of the deposit? I can't tell you yes or no. Is it the source of metals and fluid? Probably not, probably the Burgoyne batholith, but we know that we're certainly in zones where you had a lot of volatile exsolution and everything was getting a lot juicier. Now, whether it was from the Roxby Downs granite itself or these apatite zones provided pathways from fluids below to move through, that's certainly in the area that we're in. The apatites, micromarlite cavities, pegmatitic blobs, are connected in areas immediately adjacent to the early mineralization in the deposit. That probably tells us something. May reveal areas of crystal mush dikes, pathways, continual fluid upflow on Carter, mainly Carter doing work in Yerington of all things. And current studies that we're doing are focusing on interpreting the new observations and helping our understanding of how the South Australian IOCG formed, even though they all don't sit in a Hildeba granite. We need to update that diagram a little bit. So as the final thing, Max Shawclass and Dave Haddo, they've both gone bald during this time of dealing with all these surface rigs and trying to keep them all going. They actually had long hair to start with. Superb geologist. The deep drilling was more than we imagined, and we have to acknowledge the full geoscience team and all the drillers and all that stuff that were involved. We delineated a highly significant zone of copper sulfide mineralization. It's still open at depth and to the east, not as wide as the shallower parts, but nonetheless still open. But we also learned a lot more about the overall deposit, and particularly when that 1 kilometer radius out from the edges of mineralization, where we never actually ever had the opportunity to look at it in detail before. But what's not presented here, we also did a 3D sparse seismic survey, of which some of that information's out, and then followed up by a full 3D seismic survey across the whole special mining lease. And it's likely the world's largest hard rock 3D seismic survey. Stay tuned, the information will be shared, and it was a joint effort between the Olympic Dam Geoscience, our BHP Innovation, and our Resource Center of Excellence. So thank you for your attention. Yep.
Kathy's actually finished a little early, so we've got the
Holy
questions
moly.
about dam, geology, dates, et cetera. We can ask a few now. We've got 3 minutes, 5 minutes. John.
How much of 3 million meters has been relogged?
Zero to our colleagues online. So I'll tell you why. The whole rock chemistry, along with going back and doing verification checks, can tell us exactly what rock we're in. And I spent a lot of time in my early part of my time at Olympic Dam doing that because the breccia textures were just crazy. So we have not gone back and relogged anything. Now, in the early days, they went back 3 or 4 versions before I got there and went through logging, relogging 3 or 4 times. When we see rock codes and done for the right things, and it's easy for me in hindsight to say that, when you have horribly complicated rock codes, you're missing something, and focused on the wrong thing. They were, frankly, the early descriptive system was focused on provenance of the breccia clast. Provenance of the breccia clast. That might work in some things, but not for Olympic Dam.
Certainly not for metallurgists.
For metallurgists, no way, they don't care. Yes, okay, I'll answer that. So the first question was, how many times have we relogged the core? Yep, thank you. I'll make sure I repeat that.
Do you know what you choose some gradients doing?
Yeah. Yeah. I can't tell you what it is, but I know off of our drilling, this is recent drilling, we're down at 80 C by 1200 degrees. I was sorry, by 1200 meters downhole. So it's very elevated. It's elevated because the uranium is sitting there just decaying with time, and there's a shell that sits on top of the deposit that's a beautiful insulator. So the question for the audience, sorry, I'll repeat it the first time. What he first asked is, the geothermal gradient at Olympic Dam is elevated. Yes. 80 degrees. Yeah, 80. Yeah. Yeah. And it just goes up from there. Yeah.
I can't hear the question.
Yeah. How much deeper does everything go? Who knows? Who knows really? Down deeper we know, and then not right in the central part of or closer to the edges of the deposit where we were when we go a little bit further east. Things are pinching out. So you can tell by the amount of chloride increasing in the rock, it's becoming more pyrite rich over chalcopyrite rich. There's things like magnetite and apatite. So all the indicators that we're on edges, approaching edges of the system are out there, but it's now finding the pieces. What has the biggest advances in Olympic Dam, let's say over the last 10 years, is the is the ability to recognize that there's a lot more faulting in what we call the southern mine area, which is actually the eastern 2/3 of the deposit. And so right now it's just trying to understand where the significant faulting has offset. And in this drilling that we've recently completed, you can actually see there are a lot of fault offsets, and we'll be checking those up with time.
Kathy, what would be the time frame for development of those lower mineralisation?
Yep.
And does it change the capacity?
Yep. You figured you'd ask something like that. The question, the time to develop it, and does it change the capacity? We always know that that's an economic trade-off discussion, and we've recently acquired Oz Minerals, as everybody knows, and 2 mines in operation, and we're also working on Up Dam. And it's hasn't been developed yet, but it's on the path to be developed. The resource is big enough. Now, if we decided that we were going to go after down in the deeps, we probably will not be mining that, and this is almost getting on the edge of it's more than a decade away. And so the beauty off of the impact the deeps have, it has an immediate change on our mine plans. And our mine plans, the mining software for mining experts in the audience, they actually change themselves if they know you got a lot of something sitting out in the future. And they'll change your mining profile going into it. So that has an immediate impact off of it. Yes, what do we have? We have a deposit that's already got 11 billion tons in it. We can't say what the deeper part is going to be because we have to wait for the model releases and block model updates, and then the public releases off of those. But it's significant, so I can't tell you, but there would be no need for us to go down there that quick because we still have 11 billion tons sitting up, shallower parts that we can extend out laterally and not have to worry about the ground getting up to 80 degrees centigrade. So good question. Yeah.
Last question.
How much I'm looking at?
Now the question is, how much are we looking at about autonomous mining? I had to make sure I get that right too. It's always part of anything that improved the economics of moving that dirt's better. So bulk mining is being looked at more at it too. But bulk mining, I'm not necessarily a fan of bulk mining, and doesn't mean it's a bad thing. But the beauty of an underground operation is you have high grade. And high grade you can optimize off of that, but there's the trade-off on how much are you willing to dilute your grade to get your economics, your mining down. So our mining engineers and a lot of people worry about that. Our innovation group is really playing in the space of knowing that for the future, the mining costs have got to come down significantly, and we actually have to move a lot more. We know that the biggest challenge that's actually out there is the cost to fragment. And it's that cost to fragment is a big deal. And it's no matter if we're doing a small operation or a bigger operation, or becoming a lot more selective with things like bugs or in situ leaching, it's still the cost to fragment that rock. And my background was in geothermal energy before I joined the mining industry. And the biggest thing that's always faced, and we think about how ore bodies form. Rocks have a little bit of fractures, fluids move through it. Rock out of equilibrium, stuff dissolves, fluids move down, they reprecipitate and plug up those fractures. Well, I can guarantee you geothermal systems do that all the time, and so do petroleum systems. And petroleum, how do they manage that? They hydrofrack the rock all the time to keep those pathways open. But the stuff with ultimately in situ mining is you have to be able to keep those pathways open that nature wants to close off just by simply circulating fluids through it. But it's hot on everybody's radar, how we can move more tonnages quicker and for less than what we're doing now. Yep.
Well, thanks, Kathy. We've got a few minutes for a break now. We might resume in about 6 minutes at 7 o'clock if we could, please. Could you please join me in thanking Kathy for her first time?
Swap hats and go into Geomet. I'm a geologist. I'm a research geologist that has happened to been fortunate enough to work in the mining industry the last 30 years and to work at a place like Olympic Dam. I was hired by Roy Woodall 30 years ago, plus 30 years ago, to two purposes: to understand how the deposit formed. I haven't succeeded in that, but do a thing called provide mineralogical support to the metallurgical operations. And Roy had research geologists at every single one of the operating mines that WMC actually had. And there was a dual purpose. I rapidly jumped onto the metallurgy side. So metallurgists will say, I'm looking at the metallurgist here, that I know enough, or I say I know enough metallurgy to be dangerous, but not useful. You have to think about that. I have an opinion about it a lot. But by me doing a lot of the metallurgical work that I've done throughout the time, or the process, that's called process mineralogy, I learned more about the deposit by doing that than I actually would have done if I was just looking at the drill core on its own, because that forced me to answer a lot of questions. They also had a lot more money than geoscience did, and they want to know about the minerals. So the connection to metallurgy is all important, because no matter what we find, if we can't economically get it out of the ground and then get the metal out of the dirt that we get out of the ground, it doesn't matter, and it doesn't matter what the grade is. It's all around whether metallurgy can efficiently process your dirt. Now, this is kind of a general geomet talk, but it's based on all of our learnings from Olympic Dam. WMC never had the resources behind them to do a geomet program like what we started doing when the open pit expansion started happening for Olympic Dam in 2005 with BHP coming in. So it was a fantastic opportunity. We had already did a lot of the background work, but never at the scale that we were able to do or needed to do. This just shows some nice pictures of going from drill core to nice little bornite, a little bornite chalcocite hematite particle, 75 microns across. I dream of this. I think a metallurgist doing the backstroke through nice bubbles in the float plant. But ultimately, it's the products at the end of the day that we actually make the revenue about, and doing it in an environmentally and community sensitive way. SEG is the sponsor for this, and my going around wouldn't have been possible without the SEG sponsor for this. Now, a disclaimer, we'll get rid of that. Olympic Dam. We played with ore character. So but days before it was called geomet, it was called ore characterization, kind of ore characterization, process mineralogy. Collect a few samples, do a few tests, should be sweet. Nah, it doesn't work that way. And we were on the path to doing it, but when the expansion was going on, or the open pit option study was going on, there was still an underground operation. And it went through a hell moment. And we had a gel formation in the tailings leach circuit, and that turned out to be really our defining moment for Olympic Dam geometallurgy, and I continue to benefit from it, and the geomet team, and the asset too. Sulfuric acid leaching of silicate minerals can lead to the formation of silica gels. And when a silica gel happens, what you have is a material that can have 65% solids in it, 65% solids, and the rest is water, and you can't drain the water off. So you kind of squeeze, those squishy balls that we can buy at the store and do the weird feels. That's what this stuff does. Well, that's okay. It's kind of a cute thing to play with, but when you're trying to pump them through massive tanks and all that, and trying to separate the water from the solids, it doesn't work. And it certainly didn't work at Olympic Dam. We started operation in 1988. In early May 2004, there was the first gelling event. It immediately caused intermediately caused processing problems until 2013. It had a severe impact on uranium production from 2005 to 2011. But the big question is why in May 2004, particularly after 16 years of operation? And the thing is, everybody was saying we mined the same ores before, but with no apparent problems, or actually had we mined the exact same ores before, what changed? 16 months prior to 2004 that we made a decision that we wanted to get more uranium, increase the uranium recovery. Perfectly logical stuff. And the way you do that, up the temperature, up the acid strength, up the oxidant, and off you go. We actually even did lab trials, and then we did a plant trial for 3 months, but we didn't think about that we need to worry about the ore in the future. We took the material, had enough that was coming through the plant, ran the trial. And so we really didn't test the future ores, but at that time, who actually would have? You didn't really test the thing. So everything was good. The economics were good. We could get more out, up everything, increase the leach intensity in early 2004. By early 2000, May 2004, fluoride in the mill feed increased to just slightly above 2 to 3%. And we didn't know it actually at the time. Gelling had never occurred at Olympic Dam prior to 2004, so we never considered it as a possibility. In hindsight, early silica excursions that they had in SX, so meaning soluble silica was around, was related to the same phenomenon, but not connected, but we didn't make that connection in 2004. So gelling was kind of happening, but way at the tail end versus the beginning. But in hindsight, again, if we knew that chlorite could cause the gelling, we didn't have the ability to predict it at that kind of level, at the 2% level that was required, nor could we actually control it, you know? So we knew what was happening. We could start dealing with it in a grade control sense, but populating it through into the block model and then into across the whole mine plan took a while. And then it took a while for us to change a few other things too. So what does a blob look like? At the bottom of a tank, comes out that stuff's about 60 degrees and 55 to 60% solids. It should be flowing like a milkshake. The biggest question, or process or both. We solved it, you know, Geomet did. And so that actually helps. And I kind of jokingly, when it's budget time, I'll share with you guys and everybody else online. When it's budget time, it's always good to have the plant shake a little bit, just to remind people that we have a shorter term cycle for most people, 2 to 3 years, and they've never experienced it, what this Geomet budget's actually about. And the kind of little reminder without causing a catastrophic problem is always a good shakeup. So I like that to happen just before budget time, so it's fresh in everybody's mind. Now, setting the scene, and with me, it's minerals, minerals, minerals. Minerals in the ore body, minerals to define the deposits. It's all about minerals. You know, these are mineral deposits. The mining cycle, the Geomet essential short list, and the summaries and conclusions. We do have, there's YouTube videos out too about, and I think I did a Geomet one with Jessica on the GeoHug anyway. A definition and an insightful quote. Geometallurgy, I like this quote. Sorry, there's a lot of definitions, but I like Steve Williams' one, who happens to be a metallurgist. Geometallurgy is the study of the drivers of the metallurgical response that lie in the geology and mineralogy of the deposit. That's actually pretty good. I liked it because it fit my purposes. But another one from Peter Monroe and Bill Johnson, famous metallurgists in Australia and elsewhere, that rock type controls throughput and mineralogy controls metallurgy. You think that's cool, but I have to make models for things. So I have to take these things and try to convert those into equations or formulas so that we can actually estimate stuff with them. So for us as geologists, you know, think minerals, not elements. We deal with minerals all the time. We know about them, but we're not necessarily quantitative with them. Minerals, minerals, minerals. The elements occur in mineral deposits as minerals. Minerals are what's mined, not the elements necessarily. It's these units. Extractive metallurgy extracts elements from the minerals. Elements have been used as proxies for mineralogy for a long, long time, or assaying, because we couldn't do mineralogy at the deposit scale, at the scale that was required to actually be meaningful for metallurgy. So we had to rely on, that's all changed. And it's no longer necessary to rely on assaying and qualitative mineralogy alone to quantify these deposits. It's a different game. 2 equations. So as exploration geologists, don't shudder. Equations work out. I started my life out in university as an astrophysicist, so equations don't bother me. Mineralogy is a function of the elemental composition of the rock. For those of us that can remember back when we had igneous petrology, CIPW norms, ways to calculate. Metallurgist is kind of shaking a little bit. It's a way you can take a whole rock composition and come back with the mineralogy of an ideal rock, you know, and it was really around granites and stuff. So we know about those. And then another thing that was very cool, and Dave Bajeski is a metallurgist, but related to Bill Johnson and Peter Monroe, that metallurgical performance can be expressed as a function of the mineralogy, the rock texture, and process conditions. Yep, makes perfect sense. I like this, you know, because once I see that, I can actually say with our deposit, can we go through and actually make these things work? And when we were able to make it work, it was completely transformational for us. And if these relationships are developed across the whole deposit, then you can actually have your metallurgical performance also mapped across your whole deposit at the same resolution that you have your assaying in the rock. So when we think about that, it also has implications as for when we're thinking about changing an ore body, that the ore and waste characteristics actually vary across the deposit as we progressively mine it. It's like, duh, we know that, but we have to think about how do we take our excellent qualitative observations and put those into things that we can quantify so that the business can actually make decisions on it. But there's always a caution. Anytime when you come across expansion studies or any feasibility studies or anything like that, when people want to take past performance of a plant as an indicator of future performance, you're heading in big trouble. Not if you're mining in the exact same spot forever and ever and ever in time, and your ore body doesn't change. And I don't know what ore deposit on this planet doesn't change as you go across it. It just doesn't work. But when you don't have any other information, that's what you have to use. So historically, that's what was used when we're designing new plants or changing process, is to go through and say, look at the past performance, and that's going to tell me what the future holds. Now, geometallurgy, you know, where is it required? It's required all the way from post your discovery hole, all the way up to final closure. And where we like to be focused on ore, but as we know, we become more and more aware of the impact of tailings sitting up on the surface. We're going to have more and more of them in the future potential sources of metal, but we need to know about these. So we need to characterize, unfortunately, Olympic Dam, we've done this all along, is we characterize the chemistry and the mineralogy the same for what we do for ore and waste all the way through. If we drill it and it's in the basement rocks, we actually assay it and treat it all the same. So it allows us to do all this, but it's certainly absolutely critical in feasibility and construction when you're into production and when you actually have to consider closure, or now we have to think about closure up front anyway. So it's all part of the game, and you have to have it everywhere. I say that because I'm in that game. And so of course I'm going to say that. When should it start? Post-discovery hole. So with doing heavily geometallurgy really since about 2005 and for the 10 years before that, but calling it something different. I've come up with this, my little essential short list, you know, homework, it's free learnings, early engagement with other people that are going to require the data, how we're collecting the data storage for all the technical data. Tests that I do today should be applicable 5 years from now, 10 years, 15 years from now. We're not necessarily good with that. We need mineralogy and mineral-based deportment models really for the recovery side of things. Geomet testing is not about testing that's required when you're doing a flow sheet design. Flow sheet design, you take a big bulk of material or several big bulks and you tweak all your conditions. Geomet is about really understanding that variability in that ore body. So you're doing a lot smaller scale tests, but a lot of them. You need to get all that quantitative data into something, and the resource model is the best place to do that, because for us, that's the foundation of which mine plans are built, mine and process plans are built. And then we have to get the data in, but then it also becomes it's pertinent data for the mine and process plan, because we have to do something with it. Just an example for the one person that asked about Oak Dam, this is just a nice little, very high-grade bornite in a hematite breccia from Oak Dam West. And as I said, it's bornite there. But this is after post-discovery at Oak Dam West, but it's out there. And we started doing geomet style work even with the first hole that was drilled out at Oak Dam West. And that usually means starting by doing multi-element chemistry. Multi-element chemistry is cheap these days. And when you're in complex systems, you need to have it. And you'll say, yeah, we don't have the money. I think we all do. It depends on how we measure it. Free learnings, that means homework. And we'll start with a quote from Peter Monroe. And all ore bodies of a deposit class are alike in the same way. Every deposit is unlike in its own way. So when Peter said that, I thought, he's rattling on about now. And I thought, this sounds familiar, you know? And then I just did a little search, and guess what? And he admitted it, you know, it was Tolstoy, you know, out of there, You know, all happy families are alike. Each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. You know, that applies to ore bodies, but it really thinking about what's out there. So we know similar deposit types have similar characteristics. Well, for a metallurgist, they're going to have similar characteristics too. So and there's usually enough information out as the elements and minerals, you know, that we use those for vectoring to a deposit or within deposits too. We need to know about the commodity of interest and do viable processing options actually exist, not some airy-fairy thing that might be developed 10 or 20 years from now. You know, you explorers, I hope when you find something that you have the hope that it could be brought into production, so somebody's going to pay you for it. You can beat me up later. Learnings, you know, what learnings from the mining and processing of other similar deposits is going to give you a good idea, not the exact idea. What elements and minerals are known to cause processing challenges for these deposits? What's the penalty elements or minerals in your marketable product? What are potential co- and byproducts, particularly for long-term mines? And, you know, you need to understand what the deleterious or penalty concentration ranges are, and what are the limits which will impact on that process or your final product, because that metallurgical plant is not a thing that can handle variability like what comes out of the ore, out of the mine like this all the time. They are designed to operate in a window of variability, but the wider that window it is, the more it costs. And so there's a pressure to keep it down, which just helps more efficiency. So not all metallurgists are bad. They don't choose to lose dirt or choose to lose recovery. It's usually what's imposed upon them. What do we know from the industry side? Besides in the scientific literature, the industry journals and conference proceedings are loaded with lots of useful information. They're not necessarily the high-end scientific articles that are out there, but more of the learnings that people have had from deposits as they've discovered them, as they mined them, and actually as they try to recover metals. So they're worthy of keeping your eyes on both planets. Free learnings. Geochemically anomalous does not necessarily equal economically viable extraction. Dig number 1. Geomet essentials. You know, we need an early engagement with others requiring deposit data. And I put this the ones that we deal with all the time at Olympic Dam. And we all want the same information. Geology is the first one off the bat. And we control the drill core, but then other people want to take a lot of our drill core and destroy it and do tests with it that we don't like. Well, it turns out a lot of the work that we do off of geomet testing can be used for a lot of other purposes, but they're often given different names. The same type of tests are given different names by different disciplines. So you need to find out from everybody that wants information, what are they actually trying to achieve? And you can get more efficient use of your precious drill core. Every 3 million meters of that core at Olympic Dam is mine. Test work takes time to complete and consumes limited drill core. And particularly when you don't have a nice open pit in front of you. You know, everybody actually requires this stuff. And again, different disciplines will call a test a different thing. Hardness, you know, a whole variety of different tests. But early engagement, it's what it's all about. Data collection, and it's really about assaying. Elements are proxies for assay, but they're not a replacement for mineralogy. Sorry, elements are proxies for mineralogy, but they're not to replace mineralogy. Assaying actually, for most of the periodic table now costs a fraction of the cost of your diamond drilling cost per meter. And geologists were some of the worst culprits off of this. We do all of this effort to make that stick a core, and then we want to screw down on that little cost. We tried to screw down the cost of assaying at the end, instead of thinking about all that cost that it take you to get to that point. And the purpose of drilling was to actually hopefully do an assay on that core besides looking at it. We need to assay everything. We need to know if it gets moved from the ground and stored anywhere on the surface or processed and moved, then you'll never, we need to know about it. You will never regret the dollar spent on assaying. And cheapest, beware, cheapest is not necessarily the best nor the most appropriate method. Depending on what your mineralogy is, you can ask for an assay method that gives you erratic numbers and you'll think, well, I don't have anything there. No, you use the inappropriate method for your mineralogy. So, and you can't rely on the chemist to actually know that. You have to tell them, you know, that this is what my mineralogy is. Have you dealt with this type before? It's really important. Data storage for all the technical data that we have. And it's all about, we worry about this over the long life of the deposit. Russell, you're going to tell me when I'm half. I've got 5? Okay, okay, cool. No, you're going to tell me. that about the data storage, it's all about ensuring the integrity of the data. So the information that we gather today, along with all of its metadata, that the metallurgists or geologists of tomorrow or 10 years from now can pick it up and see exactly what you did with that information and hopefully use it and not have to throw it away because we didn't save the damn metadata that went along with it. One source of truth accessible by all the data users. Database does not equal Excel spreadsheets. Of course, all the spatial information that we have, because for geomet purposes and all that, it's all about space. You need to have naming conventions. You have to stick to it. And we've capitalized this very early on when we were doing the expansion work by we built our own custom geomet database, is so that we can spend time analyzing the data instead of putting it all together all the time, spending 90% of your effort compiling all your data and then 10% analyzing it. We flipped that around. We're only spending probably about 5% putting data together these days. Now, silos, they're around everywhere. Everybody wants to store their own, all the different disciplines. And as we become more AI, and some of us old gray ones are thinking, oh my God, it's going to happen. You know, it's out there, it's happening. We just have to make sure that our data is usable by whatever comes to us in the future. And we have to stay away from silos. So centralized databases are good. And the individual silos have got to stop because all these disciplines are spending money and we don't have access to all that information. And I can guarantee you any kind of work that's done on that piece of core helps me understand more about the ore body and more about how it's going to behave in the process. The geomet essentials, I really need to speed this one up now. What we do is, this is all about what we do as geologists. A lot of our world is qualitative mineral abundances, you know, frankly. And metallurgy needs quantitative, and they need to know about the exact weight percents. They need to know about the deportment of the elements. They need to know grain size, grade shapes, but not as about. They need more quantitative numbers. So in a modern sense, we actually have the ability to do that at the scale. We were never able to do it before. So not asking geologists to do anything different. It's just becoming more quantitative and being able to utilize the modern technology that we have to do that. And that's what that's really all about. Geomet testing, again, it's all about variability. This is just going to be a complex flow sheet, but Olympic Dam block model, 20 million blocks in our block model. We assay for 33 elements on a routine basis and 65 elements on other times. We can calculate the mineralogy, absolute abundances of 15 minerals without a problem, and even more than that if we put an effort into it. That goes into our block model. And then with all of our metallurgical testing, we relate all of our metallurgical properties, which means every from throughput through anything throughout our whole process. And that's about 50 different attributes that we have to put in the block model. And that's based on the mineralogy and chemistry that we actually have in that block model. So then we take this block model that's got 20 million blocks in it, and would not only have all the assays, but we have mineralogy that's important for the metallurgy. And we also have all the attributes that allow me to calculate real value off of every single block in that block model. We're fortunate to be able to do that, but that's what we're striving for. And that's all this complication just shows about, that we take limited information. Metallurgical testing is expensive. Geomet testing is certainly more expensive. We don't do 2.5 million geomet samples. We probably only have a couple thousand, but we have to take that and populate it into a block model that's got 20 million blocks in it. So we try to utilize the power of our block model. Now, block model and digital twin for a long time. I think, well, this is cool. A lot of people talking about a digital twin, but the resource model really is, it should be the digital twin of your ore body. You know, it's taking it and discretizing that ore body into a way that actually can be used for downstream processes like mine planning and metallurgical recovery. We've been able to utilize the power of that resource models. We properly geostatistically estimate the chemistry and the mineralogy, and all of the metallurgical recovery information or consumption information is post-process on top of that block in the block model. So we get around all of the nonlinear behavior that physical property measurements often have. It allows us to increase our sampling base by literally 2 to 3 times, you know, what it is. And our really goal is to make things as simple and as useful as possible. Grade might be king, but mineralogy always matters in these deposits. And the really important part of this is getting the inclusion of the pertinent data into the mine and process plan. And for dealing with mining engineers and metallurgists and others, I'll put in here, relentless persistence pays off. If you're a soft, precious petal, it's not going to work. You just have to keep on going. Or no means to me in a work environment, just try again, come back again. You know, and you just have to keep on pushing and keep on pushing. But the big thing is to try to not have other people downstream from you have to do extra work. Try to figure out how your data can get carried through all the processes that you need and that's needed downstream by actually not adding extra work to people. And it can actually work. We use our geomet attributes to actually define our strategy. We define stopes in the schedule to optimize the plan output. And then we have a validation and reconciliation process that actually tells us how good our process predictors are doing. And in a mine environment, don't worry, if we were going off, we would know about it quickly. So you get the geomet data in, the resource database, and all ultimately comes together and for us in our stope database, which contains all of our information. So as a summary, mineralogy always matters from exploration through to closure. When should it start? You need to start thinking about what information you're going to require post your discovery, particularly as more and more disciplines start becoming involved in the business that you're doing. The technology exists now to characterize the mineralogy across the entire deposit at an unprecedented scale, even compared to a decade ago. I wish we knew what now. I wish I knew what we knew a long time ago. I wish I knew what I know now. Ore body knowledge continues to grow as data is progressively collected on a mineral deposit. Data and subsequent information should not be restricted to the owner. We can't want to clutch onto our own little stuff. We actually have to share it because we actually might learn more by doing that. It is useful to other ones. But as geologists, we need to really transform mineralogy-based qualitative alteration mineralization models into models that quantify mining and metallurgical performance. You can actually do it. You guys, geologists, are the best to understand how minerals behave. We know all about them. We're just not effective at communicating that to the wider business. No matter what we've done at Olympic Dam or what other places do, the path that you choose for geomet characterization depends on your deposit type and really what your business requirements are, and how long you're going to be around for. So nobody has a fit recipe that's going to solve everybody's problems. But what we do is we know there's overall principles that we all need to be thinking about. And it's really about understanding the mineralogy in that deposit. So conclusion, quantify the mineralogy is mostly geologists here at the deposit scale. Mineralogy know how mineralogy impacts across the full mining cycle. Embed mineralogy and metallurgical data into the reserve and resource models. They're fundamental inputs into the mine planning and process planning process. And as geologists, we have a highly specialized language, and my metallurgists that work in my bunch say we speak gobbledygook all the time. We make words up, but we have a very highly specialized language that others don't understand. We can learn their language a lot quicker than they can learn ours. So we actually have to, when we talk about, let's say, an alteration style, don't talk about argillic alterations. Some of the smart metallurgists will know that, say it contains this mineral, this mineral, this mineral. Metallurgists will understand that. So we have to take what we already know and change the language a little bit so other disciplines can actually understand what we're trying to tell them. That's really important. And this is just a picture of the Olympic Dam core farm. Prior to 2014, the Wayne shaft just sitting in the background is no longer there. That's a really ancient old head frame. And the way we store core out there is a little bit different. Things are stacked up a lot higher in pellets and all that. But that's where I spent a large part of my time, is just looking at core. So even though I've played in the metallurgy world for the last 30 years, I'm still a geologist and I know the mineralogy, and my role really is to understand how that deposit formed so we can find more of them. But as geologists, we have a lot to add to the business going on. Thank you.
Okay, so we've got 5 minutes. Put a call out for some German questions. Okay.
How did we do it? Number one, yes, how did we deal with the gelling issue? Number one, turn down that leach intensity and understand what was the chlorite concentration, number one, chlorite, what was its concentration that actually triggered the gelling? And it's about that 2% level that does that. So how did we do it? First of all, we backed off the leach intensity just a little bit, put us right below that threshold, and that actually stopped it from happening. But every once in a while, we got a little bit greedy and, ramp it up. But because we know the chlorite now going into the plant actually operates in a space between a low intensity leach and a high intensity leach, depending on what the chlorite level is going in. And then also depending on what the uranium price, because the cost of acid and all that, uranium and acid and all that trade-off. But it was really just backing down those leach conditions a little bit, realizing, yes, the solubility of uranium minerals did go up as we just went from a 60-degree leach to a 70, but the solubility of other minerals went up a hell of a lot quicker, at sub 1, it's kind of 1. It's pretty high acid strength. So
So we have a question from online.
Yep.
Alice. Do you wanna read that?
Alice. Yeah. Hey, Alice, my arch nemesis here. I love her. What areas would you recommend for researchers, metallurgists working with geoscientists to focus on to provide advances in geometallurgy space? Ooh, Alice.
Communication.
Yeah. It's really about communication. For us, small scale testing is kind of cool, but I think it's more working back on making sure that we can establish what the process response is compared to a mineralogy mix. By at Olympic Dam, what we've tried to do is make sure that we cover the bulk of the mineral mixtures. And if we do the bulk of the mineral mixtures and we do testing on that, then that'll lead us sweet along the way. The research side, still developing more and more tests that actually can then allow us to work on smaller samples and a lot quicker. Not necessarily a small scale test, but more indicative test. I hope that helps you, Alice.
Back to the red.
Yep. We use MLA. We started using MLA when it was still at JK Tech and have stayed with it ever since because we have massive data set build up with that, even though we know there's no new MLAs being built around the world anymore. We'll deal with that. Most of the automated platforms are actually pretty good. The scanning devices that just go up and down drill core, for using hyperspectral, does not do well in a rock once it turns black or it starts getting dark. So, and it also does not have the precision that's required at about 2% chlorite for us to make any difference in the world. So it's pretty good. You can use all kinds of multivariate regressions and take the information that comes off of them and match it, game with chemistry and mineralogy and do that. But Olympic Dam, we don't have to do that because we already know. But the hyperspectral scanning works very, very well for some people, but not in an IOCG because the rock's too dark. It's good out in the granites, but the ore doesn't exist out in the granites for us. So, yep. So we use a combination of things wherever we possibly can. Still looking at, scanning XRF is good. XRF technology has been around a long time. LIBS is having a lot more promise. Imaging your core is absolutely critical. And imaging your core along with getting measurements off of that imaging and then using post-processing of that is fantastic. There's a lot of advances being made very quickly off of that. And our ability to process these huge amounts of data that's actually generated from various core scanning is happening. So there's a lot of changes happening quickly with that. Yep. Hope that answers. Yep.
Barry?
Look, obviously Olympic Dam and BHP are big
Mm.
organizations. Where does the rest of the world stand in relation?
I would like to think I'm the best, but the reality, sorry, for online, the online question is BHP's big. that how does the rest of the world stand to BHP as far as geomet? And that's a question I'm often asked. You know, I'm a small explorer or a small company. We can't afford this. No, you can't afford what we've done at Olympic Dam, but you can certainly afford to do your chemistry right, your assaying of your rock, and utilizing modern scanning technologies that actually start to understand your core. So, yeah. Yeah, Rio has a real good programs. Anglo has a superb program. So a lot of the other ones, the big ones are doing it. And the small producers are also doing it, just not at the same scale. And maybe they can't look as far forward as we can in time. But most people get it because as our investors hold us more and more accountable to delivering on what we say our revenue streams are going to be in the future and have been for a long time, they don't want to hear all that stuff, you know, and the pressure is on to more accurately be able to predict what you're going to deliver. And you can't do that by just visually looking at the core. That's just not possible. So it's being driven off of a large part off of that side of it too. Yeah. But a lot of people, even small scale guys are doing it, but just at different scales. Yeah.
For
Yep.
one more question. Quick one.
At Olympic Dam? Yep, yes. And there is uranium in the con, and that's why actually WMC built the smelter and refinery on site. They could not sell their concentrates out in the open market because there's too much uranium. Carapatina and Prominent Hill have been selling their cons out on the market because they do have significantly less uranium than Olympic Dam, but it's still there, but it can be managed by blending, some blending, but because their grades are below that limit, they're okay. Yep. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Any cons are good, you know, so yes, absolutely.
The last job goes to me, and I get the exciting job of thanking you, Kathy, for not one but two fantastic talks. I mean, how lucky are we? Really amazing stuff, amazing variety of information, and clearly your 30 years at Olympic Dam has just spun the whole spectrum of everything you need to know about a deposit. So absolutely amazing. So on behalf of the GSA, on behalf of OSIMM, on behalf of SMEG, on behalf of SEG, and thanks to them too, thank you very much. And just have a very small token.
Thank you. Yeah. Beauty.